So good morning and good afternoon to everybody. We thank you very much for joining our webinar about the R&D tax credit and 2021 trends. There has been a lot that has gone on 2020, as you can imagine, as we've all been a part of ourselves. And we just want to thank you all to learn a little bit about what has gone on with the research and development tax credit, how it benefits specifically architecture and engineering companies, as well as construction companies. And here in the US, really the main point of this call, or this webinar, more specifically, is to introduce myself and Jenna. My name is Matt Murphy. I am a senior R&D tax consultant here at Layton. We've been around for quite some time. And then we have with us one of our technical experts, Jenna Kubiak. Jenna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jenna Kubiak. I am an R&D technical consultant here at Layton, and I'm specializing in the architecture, engineering, and construction realm. I have a background in civil engineering and worked in construction for a large contractor prior to joining Layton on both the pre-construction and out in the field, both sides.
Thank you, Jenna. So we are really excited to present to you today some information not only about the R&D tax credit, but about trends that have happened not only in 2020, but moving forward in 2021, and how those trends are going to potentially impact the R&D tax credit, what the tax credit is, how architecture and engineering and construction firms can benefit from this credit, what can be claimed, and some of the pitfalls that come with potentially claiming based upon some variables that we're going to get into as well. And really how you qualify, who qualifies, really what our process is to make sure that you get the benefit that the R&D tax credit is designed to give you. And then at the end of it, we're going to talk about, answer any questions that you might have about the R&D credit, about Layton, or generally speaking about anything that you have questions about regarding what happened in 2020, if your PPP loan is affecting anything, so on and so forth. So we're going to get into all of that during this webinar today. So what is the R&D tax credit? So in 1981, Ronald Reagan signed into law the R&D tax credit. And what that meant was that anybody that was doing research and development, any company here in the United States, could file for that R&D tax credit. And they had to meet specific standards. Now in 1981, it was not made permanent. So every 2 years, with a new session of Congress, the R&D tax credit would change. So the vast majority of American businesses that were engaging in R&D activities or qualifiable activities never took advantage of this credit. And the reason why that was because you needed to have CPAs and your lawyers on top of the changing legislation every 2 years with, as we all know, changing paperwork, so on and so forth, that made it way too cumbersome to apply and qualify for this credit. So the only companies that were engaging in the R&D tax credit were large businesses like Lockheed Martin or Pfizer or big corporations. And in 2015, that all changed. In 2015, the PATH Act made the R&D credit permanent and solidified the criteria for claiming this credit. It really was a monumental shift, which opened up the research and development credit to businesses of all sizes that previously didn't have the resources or the expertise to claim this credit. And not only businesses that we traditionally think about that do R&D with white lab coats or making vaccines or in a lab. Really, what it opened up the door for is companies like yours that are building, constructing, designing, implementing new materials in their projects. All of those things are potentially qualifiable. And it really opened up the entire floodgates to many businesses that we didn't think traditionally did R&D in the general terms of it, but actually were based upon the 4-part test. And so what this does is it's an incentive on the federal level and sometimes on the state level available to companies that create and improve a product or process with their business. And what does it mean for your business? It means basically an immediate reduction in income or payroll taxes, depending on where you stand as a business and what your classification is, right? And these credits are really amazing because not only can they be utilized retroactively, they can also be carried forward for quite some time. And this really frees up cash for your business. And it's an incentive that the federal government more specifically wants you to take. Now, what are the benefits of this? If you are paying income tax on your business, or if you are, more specifically, for many of you, an LLC or an S Corp paying personal, then what does it reduce? It reduces your income tax liability on a dollar for dollar basis. On the federal level, up to 10% of all qualified research expenditures. Now, you can claim it during the current tax year, or as of right now, you can go all the way back to 2017. More likely 2018 to recover any qualified research expenditures for your business. And that's really where you can either get a credit moving forward, or for past tax liability that has qualified research expenditures, even get a refund on overpaid historical taxes. So it's never a bad thing. We've all, I don't think I have actually, all sort of benefited from getting a tax check from the IRS back. And it's always kind of a nice feeling for the federal government to pay you back. And that's why the R&D tax credit is so interesting, is that it is a tax back to you directly or your business directly. And it really is, like for a lot of companies that have just started in the past, 5 years, it's an incentive for younger companies to minimize their current payroll tax liability on a dollar for dollar basis as well. And that's why the PATH Act was made permanent, is that it looked at companies that were engaging in R&D for an extended period of time, but it also understood or the act in general looked at companies that were just starting out. And I think the most important thing to think about in those terms is it doesn't matter if you're 30 years old or if you're 5 years old. There is an R&D credit, even if you are income neutral or don't have a tax liability that could benefit you. And that's the most important thing about the credit, is that it not only is retroactive for those that have an income tax liability, but it's also proactive for companies that have just started out and are forming and are trying to generate business, because there's incentive there for them to continue to grow and enhance their product, projects, etc. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jenna, who is our technical expert on the R&D tax credit in the architecture, engineering, and construction construction space. And she's going to go through what the IRS looks for as far as the 4-part test, which is what qualifies research expenditures and the R&D credit for businesses. So take it away.
Great, thanks, Matt. So how exactly is R&D defined? So the IRS came up with something called the 4-part test that defines the criteria to determine what qualifies and what does not qualify for different companies spanning different industries to claim the tax credit. The test begins by saying that a company must be seeking to improve or create a business component. This business component means a new or improved product, a process, a software, or technique and does not necessarily need to be new to the world, just to you as a company. So you can be looking to, create or improve upon a function, the reliability, or the performance of this product or process, or so on. For AEC firms, this business component is typically represented by a product of the engineering or architectural design process in which a set of drawings, calculations, or specifications are developed to construct new infrastructure or improve upon existing infrastructure. The second part of this test says that the company must be applying the principles of engineering or the hard sciences, essentially saying that the work being done must be technological in nature. This does not include the social sciences, such as management studies or projects pertaining to style or cosmetic design, such as interior design, for example, because it's aesthetic rather than technical in nature. Fundamentally, the work AEC companies do is typically technological in nature, incorporating civil engineering, structural engineering, material science, etc. The third and fourth parts of this test sort of go hand in hand. The third part says that at the beginning or during a project, there must be some technical uncertainty as to the final design of the business component. Along with that, the fourth part of the test says that in order to eliminate uncertainty, you must be evaluating one or more alternatives by undergoing a process of experimentation. So in relation to architecture and engineering, it's often that at the beginning of a project, you may run into some site or environmental restraints, stringent coding requirements, energy demands, or structural challenges, as an example, that cause some uncertainty as to the optimal design of a product. To combat this uncertainty, there's often a design process that includes multiple iterations based on modeling, simulations, or analysis. So while you may not think about the work you're doing day to day as stereotypically research and development, we would kind of want you to think about this more in a broad sense. Are you developing infrastructure, construction projects that are technical in nature, and are you undergoing some sort of design and evaluation process to create or improve these products? So there are 4 categories of qualifying costs that can be used to calculate the R&D tax credit. The first and most prevalent in this industry are the salaries and wages of employees directly involved in, directly supporting, and directly supervising any R&D activities. The second qualifying costs we typically run into are those of eligible subcontractors or 1099s. Similarly to how we look at W-2 employees, we can look at the payment to these subcontractors and qualify those expenses at 65%. In the AEC industry, it's often common that companies will look to bring on structural, MEP, geotechnical, or more subcontractors during the design process, so we can look at qualifying those expenses. The third category is raw materials and supplies used to conduct research. This is not as common, but if you are, say, developing a new material to be used in construction, those costs could potentially be qualified. Finally, the fourth category is computer externally leased for conducting research. This typically refers to cloud computing, such as AWS or Azure. It must be located offsite, so this does not really include, any modeling software or anything along those lines. It's really off the premises cloud computing. I also want to make a note here because many companies may have received PPP loans over the course of the past year. If you received a PPP loan, money that you received does not detriment the amount that can be claimed. So these loans are fully deductible and so do not negatively impact the R&D tax credits at all. So on this slide, you'll see a list of some qualifying activities for engineering and construction companies. So some of these activities include the design development for new or improved infrastructure, environmental design and LEED certifications, the development of specific structural MEP, envelope, or lighting designs, as well as historic restoration. So these are just a few of some of the activities we run into with AEC clients, specifically architecture and engineering, that we can look to qualify because they usually have some element of uncertainty as well as an evaluation of alternatives and contribute to that business component, the design. So going on to the next slide, we what are some qualifying job titles that we look for when or you can look at in your company and see, maybe these people will be doing R&D activities. Well, we typically look at technical employees, including architects, project managers, and principals for architecture companies, as well as MEP, structural, and geotechnical engineers at the associate project and principal level in engineering companies. So these are just, some of the more, frequently seen titles that we see that tend to have people working on projects that can be qualified as R&D. These are people involved in the design process, the drafting, contributing to creating construction documents, and so on. And in the past, we've worked with a wide variety of clients. We've worked with architecture clients that have 35 technical employees and over 100 projects, as well as small companies that have just a few technical employees and work on a fewer number of projects per year. So now I want to shift the focus to construction directly for a minute and just focus on some of the activities we can look to qualify within this industry specifically. So on a construction site, there are a ton of challenges you might run into. Are you working near key infrastructure or active roadways where you might need to develop enhanced safety procedures or infrastructure or envelope protection? Say fall protection if you're working over an active roadway or so on. Are you improving upon any processes or methods to enhance the efficiency of on-site construction? Are you developing or incorporating any new materials into a project that requires testing and evaluation? This could be a new type of building envelope, new window types that you have to evaluate what structure is going to hold this up, and so on. And are you incorporating any sort of BIM workflow into your project to evaluate and understand challenges and develop improved processes? So, looking for design conflicts and how to resolve those conflicts. And are you incorporating this software to help combat those challenges? We also want to emphasize that even if you, as say a construction manager, aren't directly performing this design work or testing, but have hired subcontractors who are, there is the potential to qualify their time performing these activities, as long as you, the contractor, maintain the financial risk and rights to the research done, which I'll touch upon a little bit later on. But essentially, if you are, as a construction manager, working with engineers and architects beneath you in your construction project, we can look at qualifying their activities. In the design process, as well as on-site challenges that you might face regarding temporary structures and so on. So what does this process with Layton look like? Well, our first step is to conduct an initial assessment. In this initial meeting, we will look to get a high-level understanding of the work your company does and your eligibility, as well as your expectation for an optimal claim timeline. Following the initial assessment, the first step in our engagement with AC clients is to review a sample of contracts. So these are the contracts between your company and your clients, or if the owner in this case. And this is to determine if your company is maintaining the financial risk and rights to the research for your projects. Typically, we are looking to identify those projects that are conducted on a lump sum or fixed fee basis, in which the financial risk of undertaking the project flows to your company. So in this case, time and materials, if you are being paid for time and materials, you're being paid regardless of, the outcome of this research, whereas if you're working under a fixed fee contract, that financial risk flows to you as a company. So we also, in this case, want to ensure that your company maintains the rights to the instruments of service, such as the drawings, calculations, or specifications developed during the design process, so that after the R&D is conducted, that you still maintain the right to anything discovered in that process. Once our internal legal review is conducted, we'll begin the process of analyzing specific projects. If available, we will oftentimes request time tracking information. That's something that's very typical in this industry. We like to look at projects based on what employees have been working on projects and how many hours have been spent in the different design phases. So, design development, conceptual design, construction documents, and so on. That information really gives us a good understanding of where your time is spent on your different projects. So we will typically, if it's available, take that information and use that to try to identify, some of your larger projects, whether that be hourly or, cost, which projects are, have the most effort put into them. And we'll then, create a document that has some information that we were able to obtain about these projects and have you give us some more information in which we will then discuss in a scoping call where we will dive a lot deeper into these projects. And this is where we're really going to try to identify what R&D activities are being conducted in your projects, who's working on them, and so forth. And so once we have gathered sufficient information and technical documentation about your projects, we will put together a technical report to identify exactly how we went about calculating your credit and what elements of R&D were identified in your projects to support and act as technical backup for your claim. We'll also, at this point, provide the necessary financial documents to claim the credit that will be filed with your taxes. So for those filing for the payroll credit, your payroll liability will be offset the quarter after you file. And for the R&D credit, your current year liability will be reduced and any remaining credit carried forward. So our goal throughout this whole process is to conduct the most thorough legal, technical, and financial analysis as possible in the calculation of your credit. And we also understand that running your business is the top priority. So we want to make this process as efficient and rewarding as possible for you, putting most of the grunt work on us and alleviating any stress on your side. So now I'm going to pass it back to Matt to wrap things up a little bit.
Thank you, Jenna. So who is Layton? Who are we? Layton was founded in 1997. And basically, this is all we do here in the United States. Our expertise lies in the R&D tax credit specifically. But what we do that's very different from just having a CPA or tax attorney file the R&D claim is we bring together expertise on the tax side, as well as people like Jenna on the technical side that have been in the industry, know the credit and know how to claim it, not only for the companies that we work with, but they can also teach them how to claim it in the future. So we are dedicated to this particular little area of expertise. As many of you know, when you need somebody that's an expert in something, then you hire the experts to do the work. And that's really what Layton is all about, is expertise and excellence in the areas of the R&D tax credit. We are also global. We are in 12 countries, 32 offices. So if there's any sort of overseas projects that you're doing in countries that we operate in, that's something that we could also help with over there. So that's really where we stand as a company, is we understand that there are always tax challenges. There are always technical challenges. And especially in times like these, our mandate and our mission is to get as much money back to businesses that we work with as possible so that they can sustain or expand as necessary.